Boston Bruins' 5-game win streak came to a halt in the final minute of Tuesday night's game against the Anaheim Ducks, and Jake DeBrusk has reiterated his trade request with less than 3 weeks to go before the NHL's trade deadline. All that and more on today's episode of Locked On Boston Bruins.
You're Locked On Bruins, your daily podcast on the Boston Bruins. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is up, Bruins fans, and welcome back to the Locked On Boston Bruins podcast. I'm your host, Ian McLaren, and this is a daily show where we discuss all things Spoke to Be, as well as take a look around the NHL. I want to thank you so much for making Locked On Boston Bruins your first listen every day. The podcast is free and available on all audio platforms, as well as on YouTube in video form, so please do subscribe. Each new episode will be automatically added to your feeds for you to download, listen, watch, and enjoy. If you could also rate and review, that would be very much appreciated. You can find the podcast on social media at Locked NHL Bruins on both Instagram and Twitter. You can find me, my dad jokes, hockey tweets at Ian C. McLaren. I am a lifelong Bruins fan. For those of you who are new to the show, following this team since the late 80s, been writing about them for various outlets for about 17 years. And we are nearing episode number 600 here on the Locked On Boston Bruins podcast, if you can believe it. The Bruins last night fell behind to the Anaheim Ducks in the first period. Were able to climb back, tie things up, only to give up the winning goal in the final minute of the game. We're going to get to that here in a moment. But first, an update on Jake DeBrusk. There was some chatter or perhaps questioning as to whether his trade request remained active amidst a recent hot streak. DeBrusk entered Tuesday's game against the Ducks on a 5-game scoring streak, 7 goals, 2 assists during that span, including a hat trick in Monday's 7-0 win over the Los Angeles Kings. Recently had been down in the lineup as low as the 4th line. Currently playing on the top line with Brad Marchand and Patrice Bergeron. Jake DeBrusk's agent, Rick Vallette, confirmed to The Athletic and TSN's Pierre LeBrun that the trade request does indeed remain active. In fact, the Bruins have given Vallette permission to talk with other teams in search of a trade partner and a contract extension. Vallette has let teams know that DeBrusk is willing to consider an extension. Now, one of the hiccups, stumbling blocks, what have you, in finding a trade partner for Jake DeBrusk is the fact that he's due a $4.41 million qualifying offer when his current 2-year, $7.35 million contract expires at the end of the season. So it's clear that potential suitors are wary of picking up that offer. They might consider it to be a bit too expensive, and perhaps they can work out an extension so that they can come to an agreement on a long-term deal. There's a lot of things that are attractive about Jake DeBrusk's game. He's shown that off over the last week. It's important to remember that, his current streak, completely unsustainable. He's shooting over 30% averaging 12.2% for his career, 0.54 points per game for his career right now. Well, before last night's game, it was almost 2 points. If they can negotiate an extension, perhaps they can get him locked in at a lesser rate in order to get him out of there. Teams you don't have to sign the qualifying offer per se. You're not bound to that. Perhaps they could agree to a more reasonable contract extension, and that would make it more palatable for an acquiring team. So that's the status with Jake DeBrusk. The trade request remains active, and his agent has permission to speak to potential suitors in order to get him in a position where he's comfortable and the acquiring team has some assurances of a more manageable contract. He has no move protection, so you can talk to all 31 teams. My suspicion is he wants to go to Alberta, a Western Canadian team perhaps, to be closer to home. Again, even if his agent does agree to something with another team, at the end of the day, the Bruins still have to work out a trade package with that team, and it has to be worth Boston's while. My sense is, the reports all along have been that Sweeney has been limited to kind of accepting or being offered players on other teams that are in a similar boat, underperforming, in and out of the lineup. Guys like Dylan Dubé in Calgary, perhaps. Max Comtois in Anaheim comes to mind. Dylan Strome was in that position earlier in the season. He's a bit up and down as well. Do the Bruins want to trade DeBrusk for a guy who is in a similar position, or do they want to package him along with the Stadnika, a Vakanainen, in order to bring in a bigger package, a more meaningful players onto the Boston Bruins? Right now, based on his current production, how he's playing on the top line, you can't afford to take him off and not replace him with someone who can step in and produce in this Bruins lineup at the moment. So that's the status there. Let's talk about the game last night. But before we do that, a quick word about BetOnline. Football might be over, but basketball is in full steam for both pro and college hoops. Hockey as well, hopefully. Baseball at some point this year. That's a bit up in the air. But betonline.net has you covered for all the odds, totals, player performance props, as well as other options like where the next coach is going to be fired. BetOnline.net is the number one spot for all your sports betting needs, and they have you covered with scores, podcasts, news, as well as all the odds, totals, and props. Head to the website today, use your mobile device, learn more about the trends in action at BetOnline, where the game starts. Now, the Bruins last night got off to a bit of a shaky start, giving up a power play goal to Ricard Raquel. 6:33 into the game. Nick Foligno scored his second goal of the season, encouragingly, by getting to the front of the net, deflecting a Brandon Carlo effort. But then the Bruins allowed a couple goals later in the first period to go down by a score of 3-1. They did manage to erase that deficit, but the Anaheim Ducks scored with about 22 seconds left in the game to take both points from this one, to not push it to overtime, and the Bruins failed to pick up a point. Bruce Cassidy said, in reference to the fact that they were playing their second game in 2 nights, typically back-to-backs, the Bruins have been fine, but the first period is usually the period you've got to get through, and they didn't. To be perfectly honest, with it being 1-1, looked like you're going to get through, but then they had a couple breakdowns, didn't manage pucks properly, failed to clear the zone, a bad line change, and all of a sudden it's 3-1. Cassidy was encouraged by the way the Bruins did battle back after the rough first period. They were able to refocus, respond, almost sent the game to overtime, but Trevor Zegras was able to bury it in the final minute to secure the win for the Ducks. An encouraging aspect of this game was a strong effort from the fourth line. I mentioned Foligno. He had a fight early on in this one. He added a goal and an assist for the Gordie Howe hat trick. He almost scored another goal in the second period with a point-blank chance from the slot. Again, one of his better games in the black and gold. And, they need him to contribute in order to be successful. He can't just, not that he's a passenger, but if he's only fighting, it's not really what they signed him up for. The fight did stem from the last time the Ducks and Bruins met. Gave him a little bit of juice, Bruce Cassidy said. The one line in the first period, at least, that was rolling. And, Foligno's kind of a net front presence. Been there a lot. Finally got one to go his way. And hopefully he stays healthy and can boost the bottom six. Foligno said the fight with Carrick, there's obviously a little history there as they both fought back when the Bruins met on January 24th. Foligno said he feels like his game has been building. The role he's in right now is a little more defensive-minded, so he's trying to keep things simple, but it's always nice to contribute, and that's something that he feels he can still do. He's been in and out of the lineup, finally seems to be finding a home in the bottom six, fourth line role, which is, not ideal for a guy who's making $3.8 million per season, but maybe he's able to work himself back up in the lineup or just be able to make solid contributions from the fourth line. For me, I'm giving him the Big Bear of the Night award. He had the goal, the assist, 4 shots to go with the Fighting Major. So again, the Gordie Howe hat trick, getting some pucks on net in very limited time, only 10 minutes and 58 seconds of ice time. Obviously, he missed some shifts because of the fight as well. The Bruins on this road trip, that was their first loss in 4 games. They had previously beat Seattle, San Jose, the Kings, and then the Avalanche and Senators before heading out on the road. They have 2 games remaining on this road trip. Tomorrow night in Vegas to take on the Golden Knights. And then on Saturday in Columbus to face the Blue Jackets. On tomorrow's podcast, we're going to be talking with Tony Cordasso of the Locked On Vegas Golden Knights podcast to get a read on that team, how they're rolling these days. But the Bruins have some winnable games on tap. The Golden Knights, certainly the toughest opponent coming up. But after them, like I mentioned, the Blue Jackets, Kings, who they just rolled over, although Los Angeles probably have a bit of chip on their shoulders after that embarrassing loss. Then they play Chicago twice and Arizona over the next couple weeks. So some very winnable games for a Bruins team that does sit in the first wild card spot in the Eastern Conference. They had a chance to pick up some points on or get within 4 points of the Toronto Maple Leafs last night. Still 6 points back with more games played than Toronto, Florida, or Tampa Bay ahead of them. So they really have caught up in terms of games played after the COVID pause earlier this season. And so point percentage wise in the Eastern Conference, they do sit 7th, 3 points back of the New York Rangers in the Eastern Conference, with the Rangers having a game in hand on them. So that's the situation for the Boston Bruins. It's disappointing that they weren't able to pick up a point last night against the Ducks after mounting that comeback. Probably very disheartening to see that goal obviously go in with 22 seconds remaining. Not Linus Ullmark's best start. I would expect that Jeremy Swayman will be back in the net for the game against the Vegas Golden Knights. And speaking of Jeremy Swayman, he was named the Rookie of the Month around the NHL after an extremely impressive February, where he posted a record of 5-1-1 with a .960 save percentage. Again, I've been talking this week about how he belongs in the Calder Trophy conversation. I do think Mo Seider in Detroit probably has that award locked up, but Jeremy Swayman certainly belongs in the conversation. And I expect, again, he'll be back in net. If they win one of these two games coming up, 4-2 on a Western road trip would be pretty decent for the Bruins, although you'd like them to come back with as many points as possible. One other note, happy 30th birthday to Charlie Coyle. Hope you enjoy your day as the Bruins travel from Anaheim to Vegas. No practice today, so I'm sure he'll find a place to celebrate in Las Vegas. I want to thank you so much again for making Locked On Boston Bruins your first listen every day. The podcast is free and available on all podcast platforms and as well as YouTube. So please do subscribe on the audio and video portions of the podcast. I would recommend checking out the Locked On Now podcast, nightly recaps of every NHL game with analysis from our local experts, free and available wherever you get your podcasts. Speaking of the Ducks, the Athletics' Pierre LeBrun reports their new general manager, Pat Verbeek, intends to sign Hampus Lindholm, Josh Manson, and Rickard Rakell, 2 new contracts. But if he gets a sense that things won't happen easily, he could very well move them before the March 21st trade deadline. He said, at the end of the day, there's no guarantee I can get those free agents back. I'm going to attempt to sign them. If it doesn't happen, I can't just let them walk out the door for free. Hampus Lindholm and Rickard Rakell, I would be very pleased to see in black and gold. Lindholm currently making $5.2-ish million. He's a left-hand shot. I think he would look very good on a top pairing with Charlie McAvoy. Rickard Rakell scored last night. Of those players, I think Lindholm is the one they would like to sign the most. Rakell, could look good on the right side for the Boston Bruins. Again, I think that's definitely something the Bruins need to target, is a right-hand scoring winger, especially if Jake DeBrusk is going to be moved. at this point, with it clearly reiterated that DeBrusk wants out, I can't see them going into the playoffs with him, especially considering he is so streaky and relatively inconsistent. Max Comtois was scratched last night by the Ducks. He's a guy that I think could look good for the Boston Bruins, and but he's also a left-hand shot. We'll see. There is some trade history between those two teams, of course. Jimmy Murphy of Boston Hockey Now speculating that Rasmus Ristolainen could be moved, kind of jumping off an Elliot Friedman report. He wonders if Ristolainen would be a good fit with the Bruins. I do think the Bruins could use some depth on the right side, perhaps a better, more consistent option than a Connor Clifton, but Ristolainen is not that. If you look at his just peripheral stats, his underlying stats, he's one of the poorest defensemen in the NHL. Let's just say that. Again, so much speculation, questioning, rumors that will come up over the next couple weeks in advance of the NHL's trade deadline. The Chicago Blackhawks have named a new general manager, Kyle Davidson. He's looking at more of a rebuild than a retool. So, where do Patrick Kane, Jonathan Taves fit into those long-term plans? Dylan Strome, again, I'm pretty high on. I would like to see him in black and gold. We'll see if there's any trades coming down the pipe for the Chicago Blackhawks, but they could be ripe for the picking. Not a huge fan of Kane personally. Taves kind of washed, so I don't know if those two guys would be worth pursuing. I mean, if Kane, there's some if there is some salary retention there, perhaps that would be more palatable, but just not a fan of making that move. Anyways, that's it for today's episode of Locked On Boston Bruins. Thank you so much again for making this your first listen every day. Please do check out the Locked On NHL Fantasy Podcast. They've got all the tips you need to win your league. And we'll be back tomorrow with all the latest on the black and gold, as well as a check-in with Locked On Golden Knights ahead of tomorrow night's game in Vegas. I hope you're all having a great week, and we'll talk to you again tomorrow here on the Locked On Boston Bruins podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your favorite team every single day.